Why are we not telling Israel to suck it? We are the United States of America. And it's very obvious they don't care if the rest of the fucking planet collapses into this massive energy crisis. Complete lies. The idea that this would be just like Venezuela. Demonstrable lie. No one will ever see Israel the same ever again.
Here's what it looked like in Tel Aviv after the ceasefire was announced.
So one of the funniest things about this instance was, of course, the fact that a lot of the pro-Israel spokespeople on the internet were instantly complaining and saying, what do you mean? This is supposed to be a dual ceasefire, which, for the record, a ceasefire means both parties agree to it regardless, right? Like a dual ceasefire is redundant. And yet they had to say it's a dual ceasefire because Israel usually never ceases to fire. So when they got a little taste of that medicine back, immediately they were complaining. There was obviously my favorite Israel propagandist, my favorite Hasbarist last night, who was saying, like, look what they're doing to us. You know, sirens over Tel Aviv again. He said, nonstop Iranian missiles raining down on Tel Aviv less than 2 hours into the ceasefire. Since the ceasefire began, Iran has attacked Israel, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Where is the outrage? I said, oh, you don't like it when one side doesn't cease its fire during a ceasefire. Interesting. Because in every single one of these circumstances, it's like you only get to violate these rules over and over again because you operate in this might makes right environment. And all of a sudden, if you have another adversary in the region that is mighty enough, when the shoe's on the other foot, you don't like it. Okay? I don't know what the reasoning for why the Iranian missile strikes were while the ceasefire was supposedly agreed upon. Having said that, Israel very clearly did not want this ceasefire to take place anyway. They were very frustrated. They were not cut in on this deal, as I talked to with Trita Parsi earlier, and they were losing their minds on the timeline. It turns out that they were not cut in on the fact that the ceasefire was even taking place at all. I assume that it's a byproduct of the Mosaic system that they have, which is decentralized. There's no central communications hub in the Iranian defenses, so these different hubs were still continuing to pummel because they didn't get the message that the ceasefire had been implemented. So Israel, on the other hand, this morning, started slamming Beirut and southern Lebanon, killing hundreds of people in what the Lebanese side said was the most intense bombing that they've withstood since the beginning of this last Operation Epic Fury.
What you just saw there was an Iranian ballistic missile with a cluster warhead, those bomblets raining down on Israel's second largest city of Tel Aviv. This came after the ceasefire was announced by President Trump and an indication that it will take time to get this agreement in place. Now, since the overnight hours, the fire has stopped toward Israel but has continued toward Gulf countries. The agreement in part appears to be holding, but we're looking now at the details of this deal. The Wall Street Journal reports on Iran's proposed plan that includes 10 separate points. Some of them include the U.S. guaranteeing a non-aggression pact with Iran, continuing Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz, acceptance that Iran can enrich uranium for its nuclear program, removal of all primary sanctions on Iran, removal of secondary sanctions, an end of all UN Security Council resolutions against Iran, an end to the IAEA's resolutions on Iran's nuclear program, compensation payment for Iran and its war damage, withdrawal of U.S. forces from the region, and a ceasefire on all fronts. Those are a number of points that are not going to be reached, and the next 2 weeks are going to be critical as negotiators try to hammer this out. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posted a statement on X overnight agreeing with the president about the ceasefire, saying Israel also supports the U.S. effort to ensure that Iran no longer poses a nuclear, missile, and terror threat to America, Israel, Iran's Arab neighbors, and the world. The 2-week ceasefire does not include Lebanon. We're also getting a look inside of Iran today, where pro-government demonstrators gathered and chanted in the streets of the Iranian capital here in Tehran. They chanted death to America, death to Israel. They were burning U.S. flags and chanting victory in the aftermath of this nearly 40-day war that erupted in the region with the beginning of Operation Epic Fury. So right now, the entire world looking at this 2 weeks to see if some of these details can be worked out for a ceasefire agreement, but it is a delicate moment.
And for the record, this could have been a total ceasefire hoax to forcibly lower the price of the oil barrel, which worked, for the record. It went from $114 approximately down to like 90. I don't know where it's at currently. But is that good enough for Donald Trump to advance and ensure that this ceasefire holds, which would require restraining Israel, as I've said, bringing Israel to heel? That is the primary focus of American foreign policy. It should have been the primary focus of American foreign policy since October 8th, 2023. And we've moved in the exact opposite direction. A lot of people at the State Department under Biden understood that this was a necessity, and some even quit their jobs publicly because Biden wouldn't do it. And now there are even people in the Trump administration that recognize that we have to restrain Israel. We have the power and capabilities of restraining Israel, but we're choosing not to. And any kind of leaning in the direction of Israel is going to have devastating consequences for the entire world. And we're seeing that unfold. We've been seeing that unfold for the past 39 days, and yet seemingly there's no restraint being demonstrated from, or no restraint being demanded even from the Trump side. That's where we're at. And considering the fact that it's clear that not only did America nor Israel actually achieve any of its strategic military objectives, and on top of that, created this global panic that obviously had some pressures on Donald Trump. It's clear that the reporting that stated that America was the one that was pushing for this ceasefire is most likely real, right? Some might say it's propaganda. Oh, you're just doing resistance propaganda. But it's obvious that there was one party that was no longer willing to engage in this war, and that was the United States of America. I truly do believe that Iran wanted to set up sufficient deterrence. And if America doesn't think that this sufficient military deterrence was established and thinks it can continue waging this war, upping the ante, targeting more civilian targets, killing more civilians in general, and trying to turn a country of 93 million people into Gaza in the sufficient time frame that is necessary, where they are not capable of destroying the global energy markets permanently, they're going to go back into it. They're going to go back into it. But there is the Financial Times reporting that I'm obviously leaning into that says U.S. directly pushed Pakistan to arrange a ceasefire deal while talking about escalation. So they were, on the timeline, they were posturing in this barbaric manner, but behind closed doors, they absolutely were begging for a deal. They were begging to stop the bleeding, right? It makes sense. It makes sense when you think about the war objectives that were not accomplished at all. And not only that, but also Donald Trump personally admitted that initially that they thought that the Iranian demands were quite reasonable, that there was the workings of a negotiation, right? There's the workings of a actual negotiation there. And the Iranian demands, the 10-point demands that they've made, have not changed since day one. So what changed? Well, what changed is the calculation, right? This doesn't mean that Iran has unlimited striking capabilities, because I have seen a lot of people, some of the resistance Twitter that constantly talks about the IRGC or Hamas or any number of different resistance fronts as though they are pawns in this game that they're playing on the internet in a way that's not dissimilar to how like the pro Ukraine pro-NATO Twitter talks about Ukrainians and how they have to consistently wage war. Resistance Twitter was mad. They're like, what are you doing? You need to blow up Israel further. Like, this is so stupid. And it's like, Iran doesn't have unlimited munitions. And the Iranian government's primary focus is still to maintain sovereignty and ensure that their people are not being slaughtered. So they understand their limitations as well, which is, I think, the reason why they were fine. They thought that maybe they had established sufficient military deterrence. They had done enough economic damage that America would actually finally come to the table and treat them as a serious partner. Iran doesn't have unlimited munitions, and Iran doesn't have unlimited appetite for death and destruction. You have to understand that. They are thinking about this very clearly. They've demonstrated sufficient restraint in the past, and now they've demonstrated sufficient military deterrence. But they obviously interpret the battle conditions in a way that's a lot in a way that's much more strategic than random Twitter users. Okay, I don't think their capacity plays part in the specific war at all. No, there's a limit. As long as the war wages on, there's also a lot of economic damage that they're taking. Okay, their facilities are being destroyed. Their railways are being bombed by Israel, which is what happened yesterday. They don't want their power plants to fucking to be bombed into oblivion. That is not just tremendous economic damage, but that will cause a lot of deaths. So from their perspective, they've been able to show the world that they have the capability to force America to concede. Whichever, from this point on, as long as America abides by these conditions, then they're good. Now they can rebuild, right? That was the goal. Their primary focus here is to ensure that there's sanctions relief and to ensure that America actually restrains Israel so they can have some regional stability. It's clear that is the goal. We'll see how much appetite America has for continued death and destruction. Unless they actually threaten to withdraw from the talks, it just sounds like impotent whining, which actually invites more violations, says Matthew Petty. And I think there's some truth to that because it's very clear that Israel is not interested in abiding by these conditions. And given that Israel has always played the role of spoiler here, you have to make it very clear that if you're Iran, you have to make it very clear that you have to restrain Israel. Ghalibaf released this statement on the violation of the 3 key clauses of the 10-point proposal agreed framework before the start of the negotiations. The deep historical distrust we hold towards the United States stems from its repeated violations of all forms of commitments, a pattern that has regrettably been replaced once again. As the President of the United States has clearly stated in his Truth, the Islamic Republic of Iran's 10-point proposal is a workable basis on which to negotiate in the main framework for these talks. However, 3 clauses of this proposal have been violated so far. Number 1, non-compliance with the first clause of the 10-point proposal regarding the ceasefire in Lebanon, a commitment that Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif also explicitly referred to and declared as an immediate ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon and other regions effective immediately. This includes anywhere and everywhere where there's an axis of resistance force, including Gaza as well. It's not just Lebanon, but there is, I think, a little bit of miscommunication that's taking place here on the American side. It might be strategic miscommunication or it might be genuine miscommunication. Regardless, the entry of an intruding drone into Iranian airspace, which was destroyed in the city of Lar in the Fars province, in clear violation of the clause prohibiting further violation of Iranian airspace, and the denial of Iran's right to enrichment, which was included in the 6th clause of the framework. Now, the very workable basis on which to negotiate has been openly and clearly violated even before the negotiations began. In such a situation, a bilateral ceasefire negotiations is unreasonable. If you understand that your enemy does not respond to anything but force, does not respond to anything but military deterrence, that's the only way that they engage in restraint. You have to go back to what's been working for you. And like I've said, I think there are international partners here that have to play a much larger role in demanding that America restrain Israel, or maybe even demand Israel cease its attempts if they want the Strait of Hormuz to be reopened again, right? But considering how much Israel firsters have been frustrated when the ceasefire was even released, it doesn't seem to be the case that there's enough appetite internally in the American government to go back to implementing some sort of ceasefire here. I think it almost feels like a repeat. Russian failures and a repeat of even the Western agitation and the Western interest in continuing the maximalist demands being made on their side with the unjustifiable and illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I don't know where we go, but what I can tell you is that the Strait of Hormuz is no longer open for business. I'm happy that the worst possible outcome has been avoided. Donald Trump engaging in the nuclear option, or the worst possible outcome of Donald Trump blowing up the energy grid in its entirety in Iran, has been avoided for the time being. So that's good, especially because that was the threat. But it's obvious that there are a lot of forces that are frustrated by this. Here is some of them. Eli Afriat says, the time has come. Instead of Israel and the U.S. eliminating the regime is bombing Israel. Dear Trump, what did you do all this for? E. Fatlow says, the ceasefire is disappointing. At the end of the day, the people of the West have prioritized their own needs over the liberation of the people of Iran. I don't have enough fingers to count the amount of people who have ranted at me about gas prices for the last few weeks. Kosher says, I don't know how to feel about this. Noah Magid says, this makes me sick. Dr. Eli David says, what the fuck? Trump just shared a Rakshi's post that he accepted the regime's 10-point proposal. As a reminder, here's the 10-point proposal. This, of course, will be seen as weakness by the entire Middle East, says Yoav Kaufman. A ceasefire is a very bad idea for the future, for the Iranian people, for Israel and the USA, and basically the whole civilization. Oriel, I don't like it at all. This is a weak move and a wrong move. Finish the job. Terminate the regime. Noah Magid, I don't give a fuck about the Strait of Hormuz. Daniel Rubenstein, Iran has not conceded anything. Spring in Iran. I'm so angry, dejected, and heartbroken right now. Fuck. Trump instantly went from hero to zero, says Oren Haas. Are you disappointed with the ceasefire? Asks Vivid Prowess, all the way from India. Noah Magid again. I'm disgusted. A fake ceasefire with terrorists while we're in shelters, missiles over our heads, while millions of innocent Iranians have lost hope. Yoav Kaufman. What good does a ceasefire do for anyone but Iran? Donald Trump, fine. Here's a ceasefire. Islamic Republic presses send on ballistic missiles to Israel. And it just goes on and on and on and on. It's very obvious that the Israeli population is not very happy about this, or at least some of the mouthpieces, not very happy about the ceasefire. They wanted the death and destruction campaign to continue. They wanted to kill more Iranians. They wanted to destabilize Iran. They wanted to destroy Iran. And they don't care if the rest of the fucking planet collapses into this massive energy crisis. Very selfish, okay? Unbelievably selfish. Why are we not telling Israel to suck it? We are the United States of America. We are the hegemonic superpower, at least for the time being. Why don't we act like it? All of this, of course, erodes the confidence that even some of Israel's most loyal supporters have from the American side of things. So, nevertheless, we continue. We continue the battle that's waging.
First,
here's what J.D. Vance had to say.
First of all, I actually think, and there's a lot of bad faith negotiation and a lot of bad faith, propaganda going on. I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. First of all,
this also makes it virtually impossible to deal with the United States of America or Israel. If you're a foreign adversary, if you're a nation in the periphery, how the fuck can you ever trust America to hold its word? Like, it's crazy. This is a very different dynamic. We live in a different world now. 39 days ago, we existed in a totally different reality. We are no longer in that reality. And I don't think people in positions of power at the highest ranks in the American administration recognize that. Okay? I don't think they recognize that at all. Meanwhile, Shabazz Sharif openly stated ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon. How many times will we have to keep quoting the direct words of Trump Vance teams as mediator? It is insane the low regard these people hold us in. The United States literally texted Prime Minister Sharif what to say on Twitter, and it included Lebanon. Exactly. We know it. We know they copy pasted it. It's ridiculous, right? It's totally ridiculous. It's sloppy misinformation that doesn't even work any longer. I think people have hardened their positions against Israel and against Israel's malignant influence on American foreign policy and sometimes even domestic policy, as a matter of fact. And there's no way to change that dynamic. But what also doesn't make sense is that America is still operating as though it has the capability of doing unlimited death and destruction. It has the capabilities of achieving its strategic military goals, and they're just simply not doing that. But they could, right? Like, you talk like this and you act as though there's miscommunication. You say it's propaganda only if you actually have the military might to back it up. And it's very clear, given that America was consistently demanding a ceasefire, that they also at a certain point recognize that they don't have that capacity any longer. So on the one hand, they're still behaving like they could bring Iran to heel, but also on the other hand, they don't have the force to show it. Or at least they don't have the appetite for further death and destruction, especially while Iran continues to close the Strait of Hormuz and dominate what takes place in the energy markets, or has a say in what takes place in the energy crisis that will unfold. It's clear, and Myrov is correct. Netanyahu will absolutely use Lebanon to torpedo this after defense officials made clear Hezbollah disarmament is not a realistic goal in this current operation. So we know the reason, the press on it, is for domestic politics, but it's not just domestic politics. I think this is like Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu is not just like responsive to like domestic pressures here. I think this is the overall goal, is like they're pretty open about it. Like, they think Iran is far weaker than it's ever been. The Iranian axis of resistance, the Iranian-backed axis of resistance, have been diminished in its capacity to restrain Israel militarily. That is true. So they think this is the only time where they can ever do this. This is the last possible moment for them, especially because what they did in the process caused tremendous anger towards Israel, and they've lost their base of support in the Western populations. No one will ever see Israel the same ever again, and therefore it's going to be much more difficult for these countries to continue being reliable allies to Israel, both on the political front, where they can offer political cover in the United Nations, or even when it comes to offering military aid to Israel directly. So this is their last shot. That's the reason why Benjamin Netanyahu wants to sully this deal, because he wants to keep dominating Iran. And we've already known, because I read pieces of this New York Times article yesterday. We know that this was always like the Israeli goals that they suggested to Donald Trump in an effort to get him into pulling the trigger was a lie. It was built around complete lies. The idea that this would be just like Venezuela, demonstrable lie, right? The idea that they could foment enough instability internally to destabilize the regime if it didn't turn into like a Venezuela-style operation where they decapitate the existing leadership and the new leadership that comes in is much more pliant to American demands, also a lie. The idea that they could successfully attrit Iranian strike capabilities against the Gulf and Israel, also a lie. That didn't happen. The idea that Iran wouldn't even strike the Gulf states was immediately disproven. So here we are.